أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ولتكن منكم أمة يدعون إلى الخير ويأمرون بالمعروف وينهون عن المنكر وأولئك هم المفلحون.
I'm going to move to Sam. Sam has written the book on religion and law. Sam, you've heard from Sean, and you know that the argument that the local authority use in terms of naming body parts, etc., is one of safeguarding. And parents who object to it are being told, this is the reason, this is the reason. What I want to ask you, and a lot of the questions is, how do we challenge schools? And a lot of it is where schools are sending out surveys or the consultation that they're meant to do. They're doing it via Zoom. They're doing it via sending out information via Twitter, putting it on their newsletter, putting it on their website. And the parents are saying, well, I haven't seen it. Majority are saying, hold on, I don't know about this. I don't know that that's the name, because some schools have changed the name from relationship and sex education to health, HSE, and you're thinking, well, that's not the same thing, because the DFE guidance is about RSE, and so HSE must be something else. What is, in your mind, a proper consultation that they should have? And when having proper consultation, what is it that the schools must have regard to? And if parents feel they're not being listened to, what is the course of action?
Okay, well, Ms. Anne, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening. And I have to say that I think everybody who is here, who is engaging, and I can see the different types of questions that have been raised, but also, I mean, all the points that have been so incredibly well articulated by the panelists, both in terms of the law, but also in terms of the concerns, I think are, as a sort of community, you're probably way ahead of an enormous number of other communities in this country. I mean, I lived for many years in a borough not too far from Tower Hamlets, but I'm actually now based down in Devon, and I can say, as a parent of primary school children, our local school hasn't even got around to consulting yet. And I think that a lot of the concerns that you're raising here as a community are actually concerns that are shared more broadly across the communities, not just Muslim communities, other religious groups, but also other groups, parents who may not even describe themselves as religious. I think there's a huge sensitivity about the age at which these body parts, for example, sexual body parts are being used by schools, and also about LGBT. So I don't think your concerns are necessarily isolated ones at all. Far from it. Anyway, that's a sort of preface. Your question about the consultation, what should a consultation look like? And there is obviously, as has already been said here, a statutory duty for each individual school to carry out its own consultation with the parents. So there are basically three points to the consultation, to an adequate consultation. First of all, it has to be conducted at a time when proposals or the policies are at a formative stage. In other words, the school cannot just simply present a fait accompli and say, right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to carry out a consultation, but we're not going to listen to you really because we've already made up our mind. So, you have to consult prior to actually finalizing the policy. Secondly, and this is really important, you have to supply parents with enough information and enough time to allow for a proper consultation. Now, the guidance to teachers, and there's both the DFE guidance, which we've heard something about this evening, which is the statutory guidance and the guidance which needs to be followed by the schools, not the Tower Hamlets guidance. But there's also guidance published by the DFE for teachers, and which tells them how to engage with parents. And that guidance actually recommends that as part of the supplying of adequate information, that they give examples to parents of the kind of materials that they're proposing to use in the schools. It's not mandatory, they don't have to do that, but it's recommended. But certainly what the schools all have to do is tell parents enough of what they're proposing to do so that parents can actually say, okay, we understand what you're thinking about, we understand what you're proposing, and this will allow us to give some kind of informed response to the consultation. And thirdly, the consultation has to lead to a conscientious and open-minded consideration of all relevant considerations, including parents' concerns about age-appropriate teaching, including parents' concerns about religion and faith. And whilst the school is not legally bound to follow parental views, they have to take them into consideration. They have to listen. So I was hearing one of the panelists earlier complaining that the schools, were carrying out some kind of consultation, but they said, oh, we don't need to listen. That's absolutely not the case. That would be the antithesis of an open-minded consideration. So those are the three basic principles to any consultation. Ms. We've spoken previously as well about this sort of issue of whether the schools would need to give the information in relevant languages if for example there's a significant cohort of parents at a particular school who are not English language speaking. I mean, those are certainly things that need to be considered, and if the school isn't translating and you've got parents who don't speak or read English, then there should be sufficient time to allow perhaps a parent-teacher association or somebody to translate into the relevant language. But what you can't do is simply put out questions and not give sufficient time, or have very closed questions which don't really allow parents to give enough information and raise their concerns. One example of that was a question where you say to parents, right, do you think you should be teaching sexual body parts in years 1 or year 2? That's a closed question, because a lot of parents would say, well, I don't think they should be teaching that in any of those years, or indeed in any year at primary school. So so it has to, the question should be framed in such a way as to allow people to give their full view on what they want to say. So that's on the consultation. What can you do if the school hasn't carried out a proper consultation? A number of panelists have been urging parents to be proactive in this sort of area. I mean, as parents, you should complain to the school. You should complain first and foremost to the school and the governors, the head of the governing body. And if the school doesn't deal with the complaint properly, then of course your next line would be to the local authority. But first and foremost, you should be engaging with the head of the school and complaining. Now, it'll obviously help you if you've got a number of parents who are behind this. And so, and it seems to me that you're a very well networked community, in the sense we've got a very large number of parents here this evening. But you want to mobilize as many parents as you can when you're writing and making the complaint to the school. Ultimately, if the school ignore it and the local authority refuse to engage or refuse to accept that there's anything wrong with the consultation, then you would, in principle, be able to judicially review or consider judicially reviewing. But that's a very heavy-handed approach, and one has to act swiftly. You have to act within 3 months of the consultation, the flawed consultation, and you would also need to take legal advice, because there are costs implications to carrying out a judicial review. So it's not something that one does lightly. But anyway, that in a nutshell is what you can do and what the consultation should be doing. Ms. Ann, does that answer your question?
It does, broadly. There are other questions. I have somebody asking, my school refused to show any material during the consultation period, stating they did not have any lessons planned yet. The consultation period ended in mid-Jan. Few parents voiced concern at the fact that we do not have had meaningful feedback because of the lack of information provided. In general, what I am seeing, this is what it is. The schools are pushing through the agenda, and it is, I think you and I have had this conversation before, where I believe the DfE guidance, whether it's about naming body parts or whether it's about same-sex relationship, it is not a straight jacket, and they're asking schools to look at the school population before they write their policy. Tower Hamlets have put it as what I would say a straight jacket, and what the schools are doing is, rather than have headache, they are just following that guidance. And yet again, we have parents who are saying the schools are not listening to me. The schools are not listening to me. Part of the problem, I think one of our other panelists said, and you've so eloquently put it, is that you need more parents to speak up. I've had instances where 2 parents have turned up and they've said, we've had 100% feedback from those who attended. Well, there's a class of 60 and 2 parents turned up, so they've had 100% turnout. In terms of, I know JR is the sledgehammer sort of thing. The how would one articulate a push to the school or to the local authority here? Because let's put it this way, if one is judicially reviewing the school, local authority are simply going to say, well, really, this has nothing to do with us, because in our guidance, we say it's up to the schools, because that's what they do. That's where they cover their back, by saying it's up to the school to write their own policy. This is just guidance. And so our legal opinion, which has said it has no legal standing, is right. But and the schools will then be left to sink or swim. How do parents, concerned parents, who, trying to push the envelope, and there are a number of parents who have issues, whether it's language barrier, whether it's technological barrier, where they are not able to join a Zoom conference, and there are those who are not able to speak up, because they're embarrassed. Or there are those who are saying, well, we will be targeted. Our kids are going to be targeted. We're going to be reported to Prevent, which, sounds to me as another formal complaint, because that shouldn't be happening in the first instance. How would you address that?
Well, I mean, there are a number of sort of different things. I mean, on the question of, for example, parents not having access to Zoom. I mean, the schools need to be, careful about how they, supply the consultation. Ideally, it would be supplied in multiple formats so that you would, cover all possible bases. In other words, you might put it into the, the newsletter with a link. You might send by email to parents a link, but you might also print it out, so that those who don't like using computers or don't have a computer, then they've got it too. So and again, that may be a, that sort of decision may very much depend on the cohort of parents and on how big the school is, and how feasible it is. But that's something that it may be that the the PTFA, or that there may be some sort of individual who's working with that school who can sort of assist that process. In other words, if the school says, okay, well, we've put it out, we've given the parents the link, there are very, very few parents who we believe don't have access to a link. So we're not going to print out a paper copy for 500 children to take home, but but a PTFA could say, right, well, anybody who wants one, just let us know and we'll supply one. In other words, I think each individual school, hopefully you'll have some motivated parents who will be able to sort of liaise and assist. The other thing which may be helpful is to, look at this not as just as a Muslim specific issue. I'm talking, for example, about the labelling of the body parts, because I don't think it is. In my rural, primary school here in Devon, there's a lot of innate conservatism about these sort of issues. There will be parents who would articulate, they're not Muslim parents, but who would articulate many of the sentiments that I've heard this evening. They would feel embarrassed, at naming the parts themselves in front of children. They, I'm sure, wouldn't want their children in years 1 and 2 hearing it. So it may be useful to try and reach out to other local authorities or other schools where they've taken a decision not to teach body parts, for example, at the early years, and draw on that. I've also been a governor previously of 4 primary schools, and I had the early years unit as my sort of specialist area, and so I sat through teachers teaching safeguarding issues to years 1 and 2. And the terminology that they were using was, this part of my body is private, nobody should be touching it. If somebody does touch it other than myself, I need to report that. And that works perfectly well in my view. So there is legally no requirement to name sexual body organs at Key Stage 1 or Key Stage 2. And we've already, Sean has already explained, there's no safeguarding issue. And so I think it's partly about parents sort of, and this group that are here this evening, helping each other and in mobilizing and sharing sort of information. But it may also be useful for Mizan, for you or some of the other groups that are represented here this evening, the East London Mosque, LMC, to perhaps draft a short document setting out what the basic position is in terms of requiring of consultation, what it should involve, and just setting out what the sort of the key legal positions are, so that everybody's aware, and then having it translated. And that may assist parents, when they go to liaise with their individual school. They can actually say, look, I've got this document, I understand what the legal situation is, the legal position is, and I think it may empower some people.
I am grateful for that. Thank you very much. The other question, and I know we've touched upon it, and the reason I haven't labeled any specific term, whether it's the same-sex relationship or naming body parts, far as me and other parents like myself are concerned with, it is a question of timing for us. And I think somebody wrote, I, as a parent, should know when the time is right, to teach my children various things. In terms of LGBT and same-sex relationship, could I ask, as a lawyer, to you, and somebody who's written the book, what protected rights do I, as a religious individual, have? You know, for a Muslim who, for me, same-sex relationship is a sin, full stop. You know, and in order for me to say to my kids, it's a sin. In terms of teaching my kids this at primary school level, is it recommended? Is it a must? Is it a statutory duty for schools to teach or promote same-sex relationship in schools?
No, I mean, there are two aspects to this whole new regime. One is the teaching of relationships education at primary level, and then the other thing is the teaching of relationships and sex education at secondary school level. So sex education does not have to be taught at primary school level. It could be taught, but there would be an automatic right of withdrawal for any parent who didn't want their children to have sex education at primary level. But in terms of LGB discussion in primary school, it's not legally required. So primary schools have to teach the different types of families as part of the relationships curriculum. So, for example, a school might teach children, well, some families, have one parent, some families will have two parents, some families there might be, two mummies, some families there might be two daddies. That's teaching about relationships. There's no requirement, no statutory requirement whatsoever at primary school for schools to talk about things in terms of LGBT. And I mean, I say this, as a parent too, I think it would be confusing for many young children to be given those labels, and not necessary, because it's not necessary for them to understand that label, as opposed to being accepting of different types of families per se, because of course, as one of the other panelists has already said, in any given school cohort, there will be all sorts of different family situations in children's homes. I think the confusion has lain legally is that the Ofsted guidance has said, as regards primary schools, that before the start of the summer term of 2021, if a primary school does not teach about LGBT relationships and does not yet have adequate plans in place to meet the DFE statutory guidance, the inspectors will comment on this in the inspection report. So that suggests that there's some sort of legal requirement to teach LGBT relationships at primary school. But as I say, I think there's perhaps a misunderstanding in this, because I think there's a difference between teaching about different types of family, but there's no legal requirement to detail or label or describe those different types of family as LGBT. So this is a primary school level. There's also, and the guidance makes this quite clear, the guidance is not does not require any teacher to speak against their own religious views. So it's acceptable for a teacher, for example, to say, I am a Muslim, I personally don't consider a LGBT relationship to be in accordance with my religion, but nevertheless, they may have to, as part of the relationships curriculum at primary level, they would still need to explain that there are different types of family situations, different types of relationship. So the guidance, was not intended to put religious teachers who are themselves religious, or parents who are religious, in a position which would, directly conflict, I think, with their religion. They found, it's found a sort of a way through. I mean, there is a tension on one view, which you've identified, Ms. Anne, but I don't think the guidance DFE guidance causes the conflict.
No, and we are on the same page, and I think most of us in here are on the same page as this. So what we are asking is the schools to go back and look at the DFE guidance when consulting, and look at the DFE guidance and not rely on London Borough of Tower Hamlets, for whom some parts they've made mandatory. What is mandatory in Tower Hamlets may not be mandatory in Southwark. How does that work? But I would like to bring Brother Noor in. He has a question for you. Brother Noor, I will ask you if you can come on and ask any questions you have, or the question you have for Sam.
Thank you very much, Sam, for highlighting a lot of important information for us. There's a theme that's currently running through a lot of parents' minds, and also some of those who may work in schools and be teachers as well, that and it is the kind of fear of being branded as an extremist, and the whole issue of prevent and referrals, that parents are feeling very scared that, oh, if I speak out, I'll be called a homophobe, homophobic, and then thereafter there's a prevent referral, then my children, then all of this whole issue that arises from that. And so the question really does come about is, how can parents, is this right, or is this okay? And what means do parents have to be able to challenge the issue based on their faith? And as Mizan mentioned it, it's not just the issue of just same-sex relationship. We'll take it even further. In Islam, the Muslims, the belief is that the only relationship is in a marriage that is between a man and a woman. So even the relationships outside of a marriage are not things that are the thing that we, as a value, we would promote, irrespective of the same gender or not. So that's even going even broader. So it just comes to question, which is, how do parents actually can address this, feeling confident that that they shouldn't be referred to kind of prevent and all of these issues, and that scaremongering basically. And there's been some questions here of somebody who's worked within the council and teachers within schools who have been kind of moved off departments because they raise too many questions, and they're fearful of their jobs even because they may be kind of demoted or moved on or even referred.
Yes, and no, thank you for that question, because it's actually, I think, a question which goes even broader than what we're talking about here, education and religion. It goes, it cuts across, issues relating to racism as well. That I think increasingly people, from all different types of background, actually feel quite nervous about having open discussions about issues that they know, such as religion, such as racism, which are very very sensitive, and yet, of course, first of all, legally, there is a right to freedom of religion. Legally, there's a right to freedom of expression. I mean, expressing views in articulate and thoughtful and even emotive ways, is permissible in this country. Hate speech is not permissible, but articulating viewpoints and articulating, of course, one's religious viewpoints is absolutely protected by law. So again, it may come back to this sort of idea of perhaps putting out, a document which actually, makes it, very clear that, people are entitled to their own religious views. They are going to have respect for those religious views within the legal framework and within the education system. In other words, just setting out in perhaps maybe 3 or 4 pages what the basic, what the basic legal rights are for parents and religious parents in this country, because I think that people understand what their legal rights are. That I think gives at least it gives people some sort of way of expressing themselves, where they should know that they can't be reported to prevent, and they can't be called out for views which are said to be abhorrent. Yes, people may disagree. That is a democracy. You know, people will disagree with each other. You know, one doesn't want to shut out views, and one doesn't want to shut out debate. I mean, that is the death of intelligent discussion and furtherance of, you know, life in this country, in my view.
Sam, the question for you, you're somebody who I've known for a number of years, but and I've dealt with other communities. Have you seen other communities deal with these types of issues, and how have they dealt with them? For instance, whether it's the Roman Catholic or the Protestants or the Jewish community or the Hindu community or the Sikh community, you know, how have they dealt with it? I know you've said this is about everybody. So if you have any experience, please share.
You mean in relation to these education?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, issues. So, I mean, I haven't, what's interesting about this particular moment is that I think, you know, I honestly think that, and I've, you know, I say this to you, you know, you know, meaning it in an incredibly positive way. I think you're ahead of the curve. I really do. I don't think that lots of other communities are and school communities are engaging with this at this level right now, and nor have they mobilized, you know, this sort of, you know, large network that you have, and sort of really thought about it. I can honestly say, hand on heart, that if as and when, you know, the parents in a number of rural primary schools in, you know, across the country find out what's being taught, you know, they may be horrified, actually. They just won't have thought about it or discussed it at all. Maybe because they're not as acutely aware of what's going on. And also, I think because some of the schools haven't upfronted in the way that Tower Hamlets has. You know, Tower Hamlets is sort of, you know, I think partly because there is this history of engagement with the Muslim community, and they don't want to disengage, you know, but they've also got the, you know, they've also decided to kind of meet this sort of, you know, tension head on, in a sense, by putting their own guidance out. So they've brought it to the forefront, and, you know, lots of other local authorities won't do this. It's not been helpful in Tower Hamlets. I think that's the problem. I think, you know, it's you know, it's been counterproductive, you know, them issuing their own guidance. What I would say about the prevent thing, just going back, because I'm actually involved in a case at the moment where my clients were interviewed under prevent, and actually a small child was interviewed at a school under prevent, for safeguarding and concerns about radicalisation. And there's an NGO called Prevent Watch, which a number of you may be familiar with. But, you know, if there are concerns about the way that the prevent policy is impacting on individuals and on the community, then, you know, it's worth obviously trying to get hold of you know, legal. But if not, you know, communicating with Prevent Watch, who are an NGO that are representing individuals who are impacted in that way. Yeah. So sorry, I can't say more. I don't know more than I think than you do, Ms. Anne, about other religious communities and their concerns at this stage about this. But I think we'll see them. I think we may see them. And then the other thing to say is, of course, that the news has been so heavily focused on the pandemic, that I think it's, you know, swept a lot of other really important things that have happened in the last sort of 18 months under the carpet, which is, you know, unfortunate.
And I think you're right. In terms of what we're seeing, it is the pandemic, and that's the issue that's highlighting. So we're not seeing it unless there's a demonstration outside a school somewhere, and that's been reported.